Okay, patience and forbearance, ksanti. Now, I know it's normally convention to end with a question, but I'll start with a quick question or two. I've been reflecting on this, and is patience and forbearance, I've been reflecting on it most of my life, is patience and forbearance a quality that we think is helpful to getting through life? Being patient, I don't know if there's a few nodded heads, perhaps, yes, or I could do a show of hands. I think it's generally accepted, but how many of us, particularly those that are trying to strive for a more, I suppose, peaceful world, have yet mastered that? I know somebody already this morning has sort of said, oh, I hope I come away with some tips. Has anybody mastered it as yet? Oh no, we're getting a few no's and no's and no's and no's. So the type of thing, I suppose, that I'm referring to is, you know, perhaps trying to be consistently patient with a partner, consistently patient with a work colleague or other motorists, etc., etc. And we're getting some acknowledgement and some smiles there. So look, in the context of my talk today and the nerves that I am probably already exhibiting, that's quite an encouraging outcome because I'm certainly on the same page. And I'd like to spend a short while describing my experiences of working with ksanti and patience, or forbearance as it is translated to. I think first off, I certainly don't need to be harsh on myself if I'm not always patient. The capacity to consistently work skillfully in a patient manner is one of the fundamental principles of Buddhism. And actually achieving it is a perfection of wisdom, which is something perhaps for some of us, or most of us, to unpack another time. So it is sort of up there as a very aspirational thing. And to give an example of that, the Dharma, which is a collection of the Buddha's teachings that can lead to the path of liberation, it mentions patience and forbearance, ksanti, many times. It's actually an antidote to hatred and anger. And it tells us that, and this is from the Dharma, patience is the highest spiritual force. Forbearance is the highest nirvana. He who is not angry, even though he is abused, has already attained nirvana. And in another section of the same volume, this obviously important Buddhist text or volume compares the qualities of enduring insults and hardships to that of an elephant that can withstand being shot by arrows. And all the time I thought that elephants didn't forget, but it seems that perhaps it's the contrary. So again, another Buddhist scripture some of us may have heard, a story from another early text. It goes on to explain how the Buddha dealt with patience and forbearance. And so the story goes that the Buddha at one time was walking through a village and he managed to upset somebody. It's thought perhaps that this was a reflection that his teachings weren't always popular with everybody, particularly teachings of possessions and money being the pathway to happiness. And this individual didn't like this at all, that he was teaching us. And he sort of went on to launch into a big tirade, using every foul and nasty word that he could think of to the Buddha. And the Buddha didn't say anything in response. He just waited for the stranger to finish. And when the stranger was finally done, he's completely run out of offensive words, probably got nowhere else to go with it. The Buddha then said to him, "Have you finished?" And the man said, "Well, yeah, that's it," probably panting. And the Buddha asked him, "Let me ask you a question. If a friend brings you a present, but you don't want it, who does it belong to?" And the man said, "Well, if he doesn't want it, it belongs to me." And the Buddha then said, "Well, you tried to make me a present of your abuse, and I don't want it. It's yours. It belongs to you." So I'm far from perfecting the skill, but as time continues, I am realizing, primarily through the wisdom learned from others, and through practice and experimentation, that the reaction I can have when I'm being provoked or responded to negatively is often of my own making. It's something that exists in my sphere alone, and it's a habit. It's something I've given a narrative to, I suppose, and it's an external situation. So in other words, I'm coming to realise slowly that I'm attempting to be patient and show forbearance or ksanti with something that is my projection, in a way. Or to put it another way, I don't need to accept that present that the Buddha was referring to. So an example, imagine that I leave the house on a lovely, beautiful sunny day to meet a friend, and we get to the park, and it's a beautiful day when I set out, perhaps like this, and arrange to meet my friend, and just as we get there, the skies cloud over and it starts raining. So that's that. You know, I might start being impatient. XYZ, weather, oh, thanks to this weather, etc., and entirely, but it's not down to me to control the weather. I've made this situation myself. I've created the narrative, and then I've gotten upset with the very thing that I created. So if I can accept that the weather, in this example, changes like the weather, which isn't really that difficult, then there's no need for patience and forbearance. In the first instance, I can move into a place of working with acceptance and a sense of flow. So my hope is that in working with this type of habit, ideally with the heart and not just intellectually, I will not be provoked to respond in the first instance. And on the back of that, the times when I do need to actually work into, stick my hand in the cupboard of patience and forbearance and see how much stock's left in there, they should be fewer. So I can save my reserves of ksanti for more demanding circumstances. And in addition, if I'm able to move closer to a situation where I'm not passing judgment on circumstances, or perhaps people, things, anything really, or my own thoughts or reactions, I'm edging nearer to the actual spirit of ksanti, for which patience and forbearance is sort of the best translation that we have in English. The spirit of ksanti, it asks us to actually recognise the suffering in others and ourselves, which results in a need for patience and an attempt to hold that recognition of the suffering of others and apply, it's an opportunity to apply compassion to that. And that's a big ask in many situations. And that's, I suppose, why ksanti is one of the perfections that we work towards for no small reason. So if I fail in the application of ksanti, which I'm regularly likely to do, my failure is that it can be a positive thing, because if I reflect, I can come away, scrutinise the circumstances, and it allows me to sort of perhaps get some signposts as to where to apply the effort next time in a similar situation. So if I can be sort of an observer or an onlooker to my impatience, I also feel that it can provide a meditative focus within my meditation. Because often if it's a person, a thing, or whatever it is that's got my goat up, then this sits very well with the metta practice, which is the loving kindness practice that we do, as you mostly know. And also I reflected on, I suppose, how bringing up my own children when they were young tested my patience. And because I enjoyed that, and I sort of was outside of myself, it didn't really come into it. The thought process didn't come into it. This was all prior to my formal recognition as a Buddhist. And if I cast my mind back, there were definitely circumstances where we could call it ksanti that was happening. Because being woken, as some of us might know, at 2 a.m. to change a dirty nappy, or despite the capacity for toddlers to push their parents' buttons or guardians' buttons, I was often able to see the vulnerability of my children, and generally, rather than react, apply patience and compassion and care and all these positive things, because I understood, I suppose inherently, or whatever, what they needed. So there were exceptions to this, of course, and babysitters and schools helped, to give you a bit of a reprieve. But when I did become upset with my children, I was rarely hard on myself. I merely wished better for all concerned. So this was an important aspect in retrospect. And as time went on, the transaction between my children and I, it's fair to say, sort of started to move into a different framework. Then I reached teenagerhood, and that's another story. So, yes, I think in retrospect, that was a very helpful example for me personally. But challenging encounters, whether big or small, are spaces where I continue to focus as a Buddhist. And when my practice is what might be called in an immersive place, perhaps after a holiday, or after a retreat, or even after a day at the beach, I can deal with situations more easily. It seems to come into my practice easier. So again, another challenge for me is working with that and just edging and just trying to push that further and further away until I slip back into habits that have been there more frequently. And the same is actually true during the meditation. Although I prefer silence, and solitude, well, not necessarily solitude, but certainly silence and peace. If there's noise going on, I can work with that, and that gives me hope that, well, actually, as I step through the world, that I can work with everything else that's going on around me. So yes, seeking to ensure that complacency sort of sets in later and later. And another thought I had about patience and forbearance is that I don't think there's personally any great harm in sharing what gets up our proverbial noses, as it were. Although we risk, in terms of speech precepts, we need to steer away from perhaps mentioning individuals and character assassinations. But if it's general sort of circumstances, I think there's some value in that. That having been said, I have to work with, I don't want to become a moaner, and I have to work with complainers around me with patience. So, it's there's a time and a place for that, I feel. I know certainly the ear that I'm speaking into has their own sort of gripes, and through sharing, it's we usually get to the bottom of it that it's the result of sort of conditioning, and we can sort of have a bit of a chuckle at it all and the pettiness of it all. And perhaps, if we're mindful, once again, take something away to reflect upon. So, again, from a personal opinion, all said, I've fully learned that my tolerance for patience ebbs and flows. And during the low times, I'm increasingly learning to take my own space, my own leave, to reflect upon it. And I know this can diffuse a situation, often for all concerned, particularly if it's somebody close. But I'm also aware that running away from situations that are showing up again and again, when I should instead be addressing an underlying problem or applying patience and forbearance, is something that can be problematic, and is not dealing with the elephant in the room, as it were. So, in conclusion, I've reached a state of realization that patience and forbearance isn't just a tool with which to live and cope with day-to-day difficulties or turmoils, but it's a means by which I can strengthen and deepen my practice and enrich my day-to-day life. Thank you for showing patience with me.
Thanks. Often what we do is we ask for a couple of questions. I'd love to ask you about that, but have you?
Yes, I have some questions. So I've got 3 questions that I've jotted down here. What role do our thoughts and emotions play in our ability to be patient and forbearing? So that's looking at thoughts and emotions, and how much is that an impact? What role do they play on our ability for patience and forbearance? Second question, how can practicing gratitude and appreciation help us become more patient and forbearing in our daily lives? And the last question, how can we model the value of patience and forbearance to others in a world that's increasingly fast-paced? Yeah.